Baoh is a 1984 Shonen Jump action manga by Hirohiko Araki, the author of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, later adapted to a 45-minute OVA in 1989 by world-renowned shonen manga animators Studio Pierrot. It's about two super-powered youngsters, the 17-year-old Ikuro and the 9-year-old Sumire, taking on the evil organization Duress, a top-secret military organization that kidnapped them and used them as guinea pigs, all while funded by the US government under the veneer of a mere pharmaceutical company. Sumire was born a powerful psychic capable of predicting the future and cracking top-secret codes, and thus her use to the corporation was quite obvious. And yet, Ikuro's backstory is quite different. He was saved from a near-death situation by Duress so that he can be resurrected using the power of Baoh, a highly advanced bioengineered parasitic worm that takes over the brain of its host in threatening life-or-death situations, while also bestowing upon it all sorts of over-the-top anime powers. The basic gist of the story is that after escaping the evil clutches of Duress, our heroes need to take on the various hitmen sent after them in a variety of violent, bloody, and, well, bizarre encounters. While quite different in some ways, both the Araki original and the animated adaptation have a lot to offer, but first things first, the manga. At only 2 volumes, it's very brief, yet I don't think it would have benefit from being longer. It delivers just the right mix of characterization and great action. It makes you care for the characters with its slow, emotional, or comical moments, which only makes the fighting all the more impactful. It's not remotely deep or complicated, but is very effective. Ikuro is successfully portrayed as a strong, big guy with a heart of gold. He has to hijack a dude's motorbike in order to escape one of Doris's assassins, and yet he's still enough of a well-educated good boy to apologize for having done so. Sumire is, at heart, an innocent little girl who just wishes for the best, and yet her past as an orphan and traumatizing experiences made her develop a cocky, somewhat detached edge that makes her really fun and charming. The stuff isn't remotely deep, and the focus is still on visually creative badassery and bizarre science fiction, but I absolutely don't think stuff like this deserves to be considered campy or so bad it's good or low art. I actually believe stuff like this to be some of the absolute best art that can come out of anime and manga. It's pure, unrestrained artistic creativity coming straight from the soul, not held back by any elitist ideas of what high art is supposed to be. There's charming little moments that make it more than just a string of action scenes, such as Ikuro stopping to pick up an abandoned doll off the ground with the intention of cheering up his little partner in escapades, or Sumire going out of their way to screw around with their captors. Being my first pre-JoJo Araki manga, it surprised my expectations quite a bit in terms of artwork and stylistic pedigree. The early JoJo parts were hugely inspired by Tetsuo Hara's artwork from the Fist of the North Star manga, and sure enough that influence was still present here. This is obvious from the get-go, given Ikuro's very Kenshiro-esque, tall, muscular, and stylized anatomy complete with unnaturally long calves and muscles. In fact, their muscles are just so freaking massive it makes their heads look tiny in comparison. But this is completely intentional stylization to make them look like heroic superhumans, and it works very well. Adding to this, however, is another very prominent influence that was much less overt in JoJo. That of the cartoony, expressionistic manga art put out by the legendary Go Nagai, Ken Ishikawa, and their company Dynamic Productions. It's still got plenty of realistic and detailed elements, but compared to JoJo, it's relatively simpler and more focused on stylization, with some more traditionally anime-esque character faces. One way this works in its advantage, though, is that this style makes it easier to draw the characters' proportions consistently within a tough weekly manga schedule. I also assume Araki had far less assistance back then, so it's particularly impressive impressive. But the best thing that came out of the more stylized look is the variety and inventiveness of the character designs. You have Ikuro and Sumire who, while fitting the handsome bishonen and cute little anime girl archetypes respectively, still manage to be quite distinct, especially Ikuro with his elongated facial features. But where Araki's mid-80s dynamic productions influence shines through most overtly is the side characters, who aren't drawn to look attractive and neutral the way anime and manga protagonists tend to be, and thus their designs are extremely varied and interesting. Check out the Boss Borot looking old man, or look at the goofy design and unique expressions of this old lady and how much they help get across the comedy of the scene. Or the dude interrogating her, who looks like he came straight out of Ishikawa's Get a Robo. With other characters like the aforementioned old lady and this Hitler mustached guy, you can also sense the omnipresent 80s influence of Katsuhiro Otomo, whose art in series like Domu introduced a ton of artists to a level of anatomical solidity to the character's facial construction that they'd never seen before in manga. Ikuro's Baoh form design is lovely, with a cracked up, armored shell around his face forming a Zoro mask-like shadow and Super Saiyan-like hair before Dragon Ball Z even existed. And it's weaponized hair no less, which is freaking awesome, right? In both story content and art, Baoh is a work that's highly specific to its time and place and could hardly be replicated now unless someone was trying to copy it specifically. It's an awesome, brief story packed to the brim with action and excitement and with just enough glimpses of humanity to give it all some very effective emotional impact. I also love the Devilman-esque theme of the protagonist's pure heart and iron will, allowing him to merge and cooperate with the Baoh worm inside of him, ending the initially parasitical nature of their relationship. It's inspired by other things, but it still has its very own, well, bizarre Araki twist. And then we have the OVA. Its biggest failing lies in its execution of the story, yet it still manages to be pretty freaking amazing in other ways. It sadly couldn't be a full-blown movie of around an hour and a half, instead it's just around 45 minutes long. So what you're getting here is more of a Baoh abridged sort of experience. As an even shorter adaptation of an already short story, it works far, far better than other 80s manga adaptations, which can feel like more of just sort of a bunch of badass moments from a far longer story strung together without any regard for narrative impact. But nonetheless, it still feels like a chunk of the soul of the original manga was taken out. The Boss Borot looking old man is my favorite side character in the manga. As a simple, grumpy and impulsive countryman with a heart of gold helping out the protagonists against a corrupt government figure, he helps give the manga an irreverent and goofy yet down-to-earth element. Speaking of helping out, Sumire does far less in this OVA. At one point in the manga, she outright saves Ikuro's life in a tough situation, and yet that fight is nowhere to be seen in the OVA. Her personality is a lot less well-defined, along with her relationship to Ikuro, and her unique attitude from the manga isn't really there much. In the manga, she's a valuable friend and partner to Ikuro, yet in the anime, she's just sort of an innocent little child to save and protect. The removal of various little scenes like the one where the protagonist decides to get some spare cash by cheating at the horse races removes a bunch of the manga's charm. And then you have the motorcycle hijacking scene, which is not only executed in a nonsensical way, it also misses the point of Ikuro's original nice guy characterization, instead framing him as more of a scary delinquent punk. The character designs by freaking awesome animator Masayuki, who animated Naota's premature forehead ejaculation in Fooly Cooly episode 5 and the absolutely classic Thundercats opening, managed to have a charm of their own, but they feel a lot less distinct compared to Araki's originals. The manly, psychic Native American final boss, Walken, looks pretty much like Violence Jack in the manga, yet he's a lot less stylized in the OVA. The entire substory of Ikuro learning to control his powers and achieve synthesis with the Baoh worm is maybe slightly implied but not explored the way it is in the manga. Despite these flaws, I still loved watching it, and that's thanks to the top-notch direction, animation, and art, giving an amazing level of polish to the action and drama. It's the kind of thing where style becomes substance. The art style is highly detailed, but it doesn't sacrifice dynamism. The action is not only fluid, but also very well spaced and timed, giving every blow, cut, stab, and head explosion a ton of impact. It manages to include multiple Araki-esque poses within a mere second of kinetic action. What's more, its adaptation of the climactic battle with Walken is actually superior to Araki's original, which I thought was a bit too short for its own good. Another element I prefer in the anime is the design and animation of the Baoh-infected dog, whose silhouette and sketchy drawings courtesy of key animator Shinsaku Kozuma beat his manga look. Here he kind of just looks like a psychotic hyena or something, more so than a superpowered dog. I'm normally not a huge fan of synths in action scenes, but even the soundtrack managed to grow on me quite a bit. The OVA would have definitely benefited from more characterization, but the execution is mostly mind-blowingly skillful, and the core of its surreal sci-fi slash superhero story works well enough on its own. If I had watched the OVA first, it would have been a 7 out of 10 affair, but as a supplement to the manga that allows you to see some of its key scenes gloriously animated, it's pretty wonderful. As a result, I recommend experiencing them in that specific order. But sadly, this is one of those 80s action manga and anime, the type that, despite being cool as all hell and extremely well made, got a lot of pushback from Western fans at the time. A loud minority of anime fans were trying to prove that anime is a deep, thought-provoking art form and that simple, action-focused works are something you need to outgrow. It got accused of all sorts of nonsense in an attempt to discredit it, like ripping off Guyver's ideas, even though the manga came out years before Guyver. And of course, YouTube's professional regurgitator of these outdated opinions had to introduce this OVA as a legendarily bad abomination to young audiences and keep the meme alive. People's main criticism about the redundancy of the dialogue and internal monologuing is admittedly valid, but it's something that was rampant in action comics of the time, both Japanese and Western. Superman never shut the hell up, Astro Boy never shut the hell up, and everyone in Fist of the North Star certainly never shut the hell up. To pretend that this flaw is somehow specific to this OVA is deeply disingenuous, and I think the only reason people even noticed it to begin with is because the dub voice acting is not very good. So hell, just watch it with the original Japanese track. As for the supposedly legendarily bad line, Baoh has a laser cannon, which is apparently supposed to be Hirohiko Araki's very own "You're tearing me apart, Lisa." That's just a bunch of freaking nonsense. It's a very typical anime line, and it actually works in context quite well. I mean, if the world's strongest life form, capable of generating electricity on the spot, had a freaking laser cannon, you have a very good reason to be freaking out. But one element of the at times superfluous narration of the manga that wasn't included in the OVA was, well, the narrator. At its worst, narration is just redundant and goofy. At its best, it mirrors its obvious inspiration, the narrator from the Violence Jack manga, complementing the visuals and giving the story the unique feeling of a legend. Except here, it also feels like it's being mixed together with a weird encyclopedia entry. Baoh's powers and biology are explained with elaborate manga pseudoscience, almost as if you're watching the craziest nature documentary ever made. This only adds to the unique feeling of what is already a strange tale. This makes up for the overall lack of JoJo-esque mind games and frames the otherwise fairly straightforward fights in a memorable way. I think of short, action-driven stories like Baoh the way I do about classic martial arts films, the kind that feature superstar actors like Jackie Chan, Jet Li, and whatnot. And as an aside, obviously Araki's over-the-top superpowers, gore, and bizarre sci-fi make this a very different beast, but bear with me, you'll see what I mean in a second. What makes these two genres similar is the main appeal of, oh my god, holy crap, did he just do that action appeal, and any loftier sounding thematic goal, story, or characterization, if any at all, will come second. By this standard, the Baoh OVA is definitely an above-average, worthwhile ride on its own that I gotta bump some points off of for being a bit too shallow in terms of emotional content and characterization. The manga, however, has just enough context to perfectly get across the action and hit that perfect little sweet spot between character charm and kick-ass, ball-busting action. I recommend both, but read the manga first. That way, instead of being a worthwhile and above average yet flawed experience that feels like it's missing that little something that makes a short action-focused story a true classic, the two complement each other near perfectly, even if the action is clearly the focus. It'll be a kick-ass abridged animated adaptation of the core scenes of the manga, and you'll get that holy crap this is badass high while also knowing the lengthier backstory to all of the events. Both are hidden gems that deserve far more attention.